On this channel, in addition to teaching you all about I really like to help authors try and actually genuinely get better at their craft. And so from time to time, I'm going to have videos like this one where we get into proper storytelling techniques. And in this video, we're talking about the hero's journey, one of the most talked about, most basic forms of story structure, but it's most commonly used for a good reason. Now, the hero's journey, as you may have heard, was pioneered by a guy named Joseph Campbell. I actually have an image, you can't see it, but I have an image of him on my wall behind me here because he's one of my heroes. He was a mythologist. He studied mythology from all different cultures and found a recurring theme called the hero's journey. Now, I will say he generalized a lot of things. Certainly not all myths fit into this format, but it is extremely common, and it has proven in modern times to work very effectively when done well. And so in this video, we're going to get into each of the 12 steps. What we know about Joseph Campbell is that he created the whole thing, but he wasn't going at it from a storyteller's perspective. He was an academic. He was describing what was present. And it wasn't actually until a man named Christopher Vogler came along that he created his own framework based on the hero's journey that had 12 steps. That's why you will often see 12 steps in the hero's journey, because Christopher Vogler kind of defined that and turned it into a framework that is now very widely used in Hollywood today and by writers everywhere. And so we're going to go through all 12 steps, starting with step number 1. Step number 1 is the ordinary world. And fun fact, these images that you see here, I generated these with Midjourney, and to get the prompt that I used to generate these images, I literally went to ChatGPT and said, give me 12 prompts for an image generator that are based on the 12 steps of the hero's journey. And so because ChatGPT knows the hero's journey, it gave me 12 prompts that had something in the imagery that could represent that step of the hero's journey. And then I just plugged those into Midjourney verbatim. I did not change a thing. And I actually used the output. I didn't re-roll any of these. Midjourney gives you 4 options. I picked the one of the 4 that I liked the most and went with it. So stick around. There's actually an interesting narrative that kind of goes through these images that I'm about to show you, and it gets a little dark at the end, so stay tuned. But let's go ahead and talk about the ordinary world. This is a pretty self-explanatory one. This is when we first meet the hero, and we see that they are in a place of normalcy, a place where the world that they are in is known, it's familiar, and there really isn't anything extraordinary that happens there. The hero might have something that they are interested in, something that they want. Maybe they want to get out of this normal place. Maybe they want to stay there. But whatever the case, we just get a picture of what their normal world looks like. And then we move on to the call to adventure. In some form or another, the hero gets a call, something that demands that they leave their ordinary world and enter into a new unfamiliar territory, a new adventure. This is Bilbo Baggins meeting with all of the dwarves and Gandalf, and despite his best wishes, not wanting to go on an adventure, he ends up being called on that adventure, right? Now, at the beginning, after the hero has been called to an adventure, there is usually some kind of refusal of the call. That's step 3, where due to fear, doubt, or a sense of obligation to something else, the hero decides that they don't want to answer the call. They're just going to stay put, represented here in this kind of like broken map and compass here. There's an interesting imagery that ChatGPT suggested, but there's a refusal of the call. The hero doesn't want to go, and we'll see how that works out for them. In the next step is number 4, meeting with the mentor. At some point along the journey, and these don't necessarily happen in order, but they usually do, the hero meets with a mentor, and the mentor gives them some kind of wisdom, We will often, the hero will often give the person a gift of some kind, something to help them in their journey. We see this in Star Wars, of course, Star Wars being probably the quintessential hero's journey story, where Obi-Wan Kenobi comes along, he gives Luke his lightsaber and things like that. And then we have step 5, which is crossing the threshold, where the hero at some point has to enter into some unfamiliar place. I thought this was a really interesting image, just showing this really spooky, really creepy threshold, this doorway, where we don't know what's on the other side. And it's strange, it's unfamiliar. It is not the ordinary world. It's a very sharp contrast that we are not in Kansas anymore. And often there is some kind of challenge that comes at this point, something that they have to do, an obstacle, a guardian, some kind of threshold that they have to cross. And then I liked that this was represented by a kind of maze here. We have step 6, which is tests, allies, and enemies. And at this point, we start getting a whole bunch of challenges. The hero is faced with a number of different challenges, but along the way, they start to pick up friends. They get allies, they get new enemies, and the tapestry of the story begins to really flesh out, so we get a solid sense of what is happening, who are the different players on both sides, etc. We also learn more about the hero, more about all of the different separate characters, etc., etc. Then we move on to step 7, which is approach to the Inmost cave, which I thought this video or this image was appropriate here. This is kind of the center point of the story, where the hero must enter the cave. All right. Now, the cave is representative of their greatest challenge. It's usually preceded by a bunch of further tests. And as usually, because this is kind of the midpoint of the story, there's usually some chance for reflection or other kind of preparation before we get to this point. And then we get into step 8, which is the ordeal. I thought this was a particularly chilling image here, and very appropriate because this is where the hero faces their biggest challenge of the entire story. There's it can involve life and death crises. This can depend on what genre you're writing in. The crisis could be something physical, literal, a threat of death kind of thing, or it could be something, death of some other kind, like social death or relationship death or what have you. But the point is that the threat is very strong here, and the hero, by going through this ordeal, is going to have some kind of transformation. Now, the reward that comes at this point, having gone through the ordeal and survived, is that the hero gets some kind of reward. And I thought this was kind of a cool image. It's very, fantasy. Sometimes this step is called seizing the sword, and we don't have a sword here per se, but this is basically the right idea, that the hero has some kind of reward that they get for facing their inner demons and their outer demons. The reward can be knowledge, it can be a physical object, like in this particular case. It could also be something as simple as the loyalty of allies and enemies, etc. But at some point they get this reward. Which leads us to step 10, which is the road back. Now, the road back doesn't mean the story is over. This is when they are starting to return to their place of origin, back to the ordinary world, but it brings challenges of its own, and they are pursued by various forces. There may be additional tests, other things that they go through. So that's why you see kind of this crumbling pathway here. So they're, kind of in the story I have in my head of these images that we're looking at. They're leaving the cave, but things are falling down around them. And then here's where the images got really interesting. We have step 11. This is called the resurrection. And the prompt that ChatGPT gave me for this image was some guy engulfed in fire becoming a bigger, more powerful version of themselves. And Midjourney ended up interpreting that as kind of this sinister fire demon thing. The resurrection typically is where the hero faces a kind of final exam where, we've had the ordeal already and they've changed because of that, but there is a sort of final step where it becomes where they have a second life and death moment, and they use everything that they've learned and they get to the climax of the story. So this is the climax of the story, and they have that final transformation. And it's because of what they went through in the first ordeal that they have the tool sets that they need to survive this final crisis and to have that final resurrection. I just think it's interesting that the prompt and the image that we got here almost makes it seem like they had a sort of negative character arc here and became so we had like a negative heroes arc where they turned into something a little bit more sinister than perhaps the heroic transformation that we usually want to see. And this is going to get even more interesting with the next image, the return. So the return, typically, the hero comes back to their ordinary world. They, rejoin with their friends, their family, what have you, but they come back changed. They are no longer the person that they were. And usually they bring something back to their village, their ordinary place, that is of benefit to everybody else. It's Joseph Campbell calls this the elixir, and they can take the elixir and bestow it on people so that they can benefit their community because of this adventure that they've had. I just thought this image was interesting because he's still looking pretty sinister, right? And this elixir, I'm not sure I'd want to drink anything out of that elixir. And now I kind of want to write this story because it's been interesting so far, but you get the idea. So this is the return, where the hero comes back with the elixir. Maybe the elixir may have a good or bad effect on whoever drinks it. Of course, the elixir is it can be a literal thing, but it's usually a figurative thing. Whatever, some kind of benefit that the ordinary world can partake of. But it can be an actual elixir if you wanted it to be. It might be a little on the nose these days, but you can do that. And so that is the hero's journey, ladies and gentlemen. I highly recommend you use this in your story. At the very least, take the story outline that you have and make sure that you are hitting each of these beats at some point. Because if you are not, you're actually going to be getting a story that may lack a couple of core fundamentals that resonate with people. One of the biggest things that we want to do as authors is create resonance with readers. And the hero's journey has proven itself over and over and over again that it resonates with readers when done well. And so you want to make sure you're doing that. I'm working right now on creating a chapter outline that incorporates the hero's journey, because each step isn't necessarily going to be one chapter. Some of the chapters, particularly chapters like the tests and the allies and the enemies, may be a good chunk of the whole book. And so you'd want to devote multiple chapters to that. So I'm working on something that could maybe take that into account. But I do have some advice regarding if you are writing a novella. I personally like to have novellas that follow a 12-chapter formula that is based on the hero's journey. It's like a concentrated version of the hero's journey in 12 chapters. Assuming you have about 2,000 words per chapter, 2,000 to 3,000, that's still a pretty short novel. That'd be 24 to 36,000 words. Good-sized novella, but not large enough to be a book. But still, you get that complete story because you're using the complete hero's journey. And so something that I might do if I was prompting ChatGPT or Claude or one of the others, I would say, write me an outline based on the hero's journey in 12 chapters for a novella, something along those lines. I've also done a video in the past about how to plot out a series. And if I were doing that, I would have a series prompt and I would say something along the same lines, like write out a story that takes place across 12 books and roughly follows the hero's journey. The problem with a series, though, is it will basically give you the outline of a book, and you actually want more to happen in each book. So I would also prompt it to have a beginning, middle, and end for each book, and to follow a 3-act formula for each book, and combine that with the hero's journey. So say Each book should follow one step of the hero's journey and have a beginning, middle, and an end based on the 3-act formula. And then you can usually get a decent 12-book outline using that formula. So those are my thoughts on the hero's journey and how you can use AI, and I'll see you in the next video.